president, there are few, if any, aides any closer to Donald Trump. Seen here this week walking to the helicopter with, among others, the president's son-in-law and White House aide. Right there on the right-hand side of her, to her immediate left, the other gentleman in the blue suit, Dan Scavino, the president's social media director. But the big story tonight was when the president said that he and the First Lady were going to begin the quarantine process. That left us with several hours of speculation that he in fact was going in for further testing. The Abbott brand rapid test that the president has touted, the device itself has appeared alongside him in the White House Rose Garden, is the first line test of choice in the Trump West Wing, but it's then common to go deeper with tests that give a better chance of finding a positive result, tests that have fewer false negatives or positives. But we learned literally within the last 5 minutes the president has indeed tested positive for COVID-19, along with the First Lady. Peter Alexander, a White House correspondent, has been reporting this on his own and has been able to join our coverage. Peter, what can you add?
Well, Brian, this is a striking announcement that we're just now hearing from the president. It became increasingly suspicious over the course of the last several hours. Now more than 4 hours, approaching 4 hours have passed since the president first said that he had been tested, was awaiting the results, and in the meantime he said he would begin the quarantine process. And I reached out to multiple White House officials, heard very little in response. Obviously, as someone who goes into the White House regularly, we receive the Abbott test, those rapid tests, and you can get the results very quickly. So it became unclear why it would take this long for the White House to get the result. Clearly now we understand that the president has tested positive. To give you a sense of how we got to this place, not just the president, I should note the First Lady as well. We learned a matter of hours ago that one of the president's closest confidants, one of his closest aides, Hope Hicks, had tested positive. We understood she's been traveling with the president on Air Force One multiple times this week. She was with him in Pennsylvania on Saturday. She was with him at the debate in Cleveland on Tuesday, and she traveled with him again on Wednesday to Minnesota. I guess that's just yesterday, for a rally that took place there. As we understand it, it was on when she was there in the evening late yesterday, Wednesday, that she began to feel some symptoms. She was quarantined on Air Force One. She flew back on Air Force One yesterday evening, and then it was this morning that she tested positive. Strikingly, even after, apparently, according to our sources, testing positive this morning, the president continued with his itinerary today. He traveled to a fundraiser at Bedminster, came back to the White House this evening, but notably when he traveled to Bedminster, Brian, he traveled with a smaller team. Kayleigh McEnany, his press secretary, was not with him, nor were many of the other top advisors who would regularly travel with him. But the White House, nonetheless, this evening had put out its schedule for tomorrow. Effectively, the plan was to go ahead as it had always been. The president tomorrow was scheduled, and at least for the moment the schedule remains, that he's supposed to have a phone call specifically about vulnerable seniors, vulnerable to COVID-19, but clearly right now there is no more vulnerable senior in America than Donald Trump himself, a 74-year-old man. He was scheduled to be traveling to another one of those rallies tomorrow in Sanford, Florida, just outside of Orlando, and then on Saturday was scheduled to have a pair of rallies in Wisconsin. Over the course of this night, Brian, I've been reaching out to many of the president's family members and aides, and they've been reluctant to say anything, having reached out to Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, who are traveling with the president this week, trying to find out if they had tested positive, or if they have been tested, or if they are self-quarantined. Reaching out to the chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who is traveling with the president as well. What is striking, given the fact that just 48 hours ago, Brian, the president was traveling to Cleveland and back, he was surrounded by a who's who of White House advisors, top Congress members, Jim Jordan of Ohio, the Republican from Ohio, among others, family members. Eric Trump was there. But Brian, as we sort of wrap our head around this, this is a striking announcement from the President of the United States, and it comes only a matter of hours after in that Al Smith dinner, one of these charity dinners that he was participating in, a pre-recorded set of remarks. He said that the end of the pandemic was in sight. Well, clearly the president is dealing with his own battle with this virus right now, Brian.
Peter Alexander, thank you for your reporting, and indeed any travel schedule the White House has put out for the next couple hours or days might as well go in the shredder. I think it's safe to say this president is going nowhere for a while. To viewers of NBC programming tonight, whether you're here on the East Coast watching late night or perhaps late local news in the Mountain Time Zone or NBC primetime programming on the West, I am told that while our coverage continues on MSNBC, we may have missed the lead story, the headline at the top of this special report. It is quite simply that the President of the United States and the First Lady have both tested positive for the coronavirus. It is extraordinary on many different levels given this president's history with managing, or many would argue mismanaging, what is still an out-of-control pandemic in our country. It is extraordinary given the fact that we are 32 days away from Election Day in this country. It's extraordinary given the fact that he was feet away from Joe Biden on a stage where they were both expelling air for a good 90 minutes just a few nights ago. Extraordinary given the circle of family, friends, aides, military, law enforcement, medical personnel who have been in and around this president's immediate circle in just the past few days. But the President of the United States, as the world, much of the world will wake up learning, has the coronavirus, has tested positive. In a statement he said he's going to follow all the protocols. Tonight, FLOTUS and I, First Lady of the United States, and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. The president's age, of course, puts him in one of those high-risk groups that he is fond of talking about when he, as recently as several times this week, has taken steps to indicate that, in his view, young people are way out of the danger zone. He has even been litigating, as recently as this week, the wearing of masks and mocking his opponent Joe Biden for doing so. That is the news we are covering here at this hour, just after 1 a.m. on the East Coast. We wanted to pass it along to all those viewers of the NBC television network. Our live coverage of this developing colossal story continues all evening long on MSNBC. I'm Brian Williams, NBC News. Okay, our live coverage continues on MSNBC. As we were saying before we brought in our national viewing audience on the NBC television network, I'm going to pause briefly and ask the control room who we have to Hallie Jackson. White House correspondent Hallie Jackson rejoins us. She was on early on with us on this coverage. Hallie, your face says it all. You and I have been doing the same thing, and that is following the story. But as you and I both kind of suspected and came close to speculating earlier this evening, the time gap between the president saying to Sean Hannity very casually that he and the First Lady were getting tested, taking pains to mention the people that they meet on the road, people who insist on contact with the president. He mentioned members of the military. And then knowing what you and I do about testing protocols at the White House, the rapid test that is always the first wave test, the follow-on testing that are often done to wave off early false positives or negatives, it made sense that we heard later on.
And Brian, I can tell you, and forgive me, I'm juggling a laptop and a couple of phones here as I've been talking to sources close to the president here. I just spoke with a senior administration official as this news was breaking. So here's what I can tell you, Brian, based on my reporting, that the president will be quarantining and working from the residence. That's what we're being told. The senior official would not get into whether the president is feeling symptomatic or not, but said that there will be safety protocols in place. They will sort of vigorously enforce enforce those, social distancing, continuation of testing. And Brian, we're just now getting our hands on a memo from the president's physician, of course, Dr. Conley, Sean Conley, who confirms now, as the president did on Twitter, that both the president and the first lady have tested positive for the virus. He says that they are both feeling well at the time and, of course, do plan to stay in the residence there, adding that he has the support of what he calls some of the country's greatest medical professionals and institutions, and that he expects the president to continue carrying out his duties without disruption while recovering, promising to keep you updated on any future developments. Brian, you cannot overstate what this is. The president of the United States has come down with the coronavirus and has tested positive now after everything that we've seen for the last 6 months and everything that he has talked about and said about the virus and its implications and its effects on this country. The president even recently talked about this nation rounding the corner. He is now one of the 7+ million Americans who has come down with this virus. I think it's notable that Dr. Conley talked about help from the country's greatest medical professionals, because this is now something where the White House clearly is pulling in sort of an all-hands-on-deck response here. The question is, what happens next? Something that you and my colleague Peter Alexander just talked about was the president's travel. We are 30 days, right? 32 days from Election Day here. The president had an aggressive campaign schedule. For months, I have been hearing from sources close to the campaign and the president that the closer it gets to Election Day, the more he will be on the road. He likes to get out and do those rallies where, as you know, we have seen crowds with very few masks, almost no social distancing repeatedly. The president is not going to be doing that now in the run-up to the election. So the outstanding questions that we have are how he will handle this sort of work-from-home quarantine situation. He is feeling well now, according to Dr. Conley. The question is this early on in the development of the virus in his system? Might that change? That is something, of course, we're going to need to watch extremely closely here. How this affects the political campaign, and frankly, Brian, how this affects the business of America. The person that I just got off the phone with said the key thing here is to keep on working. There is still business to be done. There is still a job to be done, and the president, this person says, will continue to do that. But there is a lot of implications for this here. The president, of course, is not the first foreign leader to come down with coronavirus. I'm thinking of Boris Johnson, for example. I'm thinking of Bolsonaro as well, but it is significant in that the U.S. has grappled to contain this virus and to contain this pandemic, and now the president has become, frankly, the face of the pandemic for the rest of the country. Right.
Hallie Jackson, thank you. To our viewers still with us on our live coverage here on MSNBC, we have asked a lot of you thus far. We need to ask it again. We're going to pause and again bring in the viewers of the NBC television network to read the statement just out under the cover of the president's press secretary from the White House physician. We'll pause and do that now. This is an NBC News special report. Here's Brian Williams. Brian Williams back with you again. In addition to our ongoing coverage on the MSNBC network, we're coming on to let viewers on NBC know what we know as we are covering an extraordinary development. 32 days out from an election, the President of the United States has tested positive for COVID-19. I'm going to read from the statement as I see it. This came out under the heading of the press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. It is from Sean P. Conley, the physician to the president, who also happens to be a commander in the U.S. Navy. He writes, I release the following information with the permission of President Donald J. Trump and First Lady Melania Trump. This evening I received confirmation that both President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump have tested positive for COVID-19. The President and First Lady are both well at this time. They plan to remain at home within the White House during their convalescence. The White House medical team and I will maintain a vigilant watch, and I appreciate the support provided by some of our country's greatest medical professionals and institutions. Rest assured, I expect the President to continue carrying out his duties without disruption while recovering, and I will keep you updated on any future developments. A couple of things to point out here as this news sinks in across our country and around the world. Will we see any more presidential debates? I think it's safe to say tonight that answer is no. What of the presidential campaign for re-election of Donald Trump will we see now? Completely unknown, but any travel schedule that's been put out for the next couple of days surely will be scrapped. The president's medical condition, as we saw the doctor say, will be closely watched, closely tracked. They have superb medical facilities at the White House, but it's not speculation to say that should there be any worsening in his condition, they will waste no time and will not hesitate to get him over to Walter Reed, where they have a full medical facility available, not just, of course, to veterans of the nation's military, but traditionally to treat our presidents as well. Repeating the hour's top story, Donald Trump, through his physician and press secretary, has announced the worst possible news. He has tested positive for COVID-19. This virus still running across our country in an uncontrolled pandemic. This virus that has claimed over 200,000 lives has now left him and the First Lady with a positive test result. This news first came out tonight when we heard the news that close White House aide